The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. There was a scholar of the law who stood up to test Jesus and said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written of the law? How do you read it?" He said in reply, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Jesus replied to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But because he wished to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man fell victim to robbers as he went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. They stripped and beat him and went off, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. Likewise, a Levite came to the place, and when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. But a Samaritan traveler who came upon him was moved with compassion at the sight. He approached the victim, poured oil and wine over his wounds, and bandaged them. Then he lifted him up on his own animal, took him to an inn, and cared for him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper with the instruction, "Take care of him. If you spend more than what I have given you, I shall repay you on the way back." Which of these 3, in your opinion, was neighbor with the robber's victim? He replied, "The one who treated him with mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." The Gospel of the Lord. In this reading, for the first reading from the book of Deuteronomy, it's chapter 30, so it's getting later in there, in that chapter. And Moses is exhorting them. He's getting ready to go, and he's telling people, he's kind of encouraging them in faith. So he says, "If only you would heed the voice of the Lord your God and keep his commandments and statutes that are written in the book of the law. When you return to the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul." So he's exhorting them, return back. Because remember, at that time, Moses was constantly prostrating himself before God and asking for mercy for them. But he kind of goes on, "For this command I am joining you today. It is not too mysterious or remote for you." So a lot of times we might think, "Oh, it's just too hard. We can't do this. There's no way we can do this. I'm a sinner. I can't do it. It's way out there. There's just something I can't do." No, it's not too remote or far. It's not so mysterious. Do God's will. It's really as simple as that. Do God's will. And so when we look at this first reading, or the gospel reading here from Luke chapter 10, what must I do and inherit an eternal life? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. And your neighbor is yourself. So your whole being, the person responds, with your whole being, with my whole being, we love the Lord our God. And so this is something very different. And then, okay, who is my neighbor? So now he's getting into this part of the gospel reading. How do I love the Lord? How do I get salvation? Because that's the essential question here. How do I get salvation? Right? Because even at the end, go and do likewise, he says. Okay, so who is my neighbor? He's trying to justify. He doesn't want to love his neighbor, right? So the guy who asks, he doesn't want to love his neighbor. He wants to justify himself. And so he goes into the story of the Samaritan. You look in the story of the Samaritan, you got the priest, you got the Levite, and then you got the Samaritan. The Samaritan's a sinner. Okay, he has no means of salvation really there in that. And he's the one that is the neighbor. He is the one that loves. And so it's kind of an interesting story with all that. A lot of times maybe we think, well, I'm a sinner. I can't do that. I'm not worthy. Yeah, nobody is. Obviously the priest isn't. The Levite isn't. The Samaritan isn't. That's the real story. But we're all called. We're all called to bring Christ to others, to be a light to the world. And so we shall love the Lord your God. We got to love the Lord our God. Now, what happens here is the works that the Samaritan does is a response to the love of God. It's a response to love. So now, when we think about this, and I don't think any of you have been told this. If you have, maybe it's been a very long time. But work is not meant for money. Let me repeat that, because this is something very different thought. Work is not meant for money. It wasn't meant for the paycheck. That's not what work is all about. Work, God made work. Humanity made money. So why did God make work? God made work, labor. And I'm not talking just about your jobs you get your paycheck with. Any kind of labor, anything you do, right? God made work as a means by which we love our neighbor. And because it is a means by which we love our neighbor, it is a means by which we love God. That's what work, that's what labor is all about. It's about loving our neighbor and loving God. And so we have to realize our being is all about God's work. Like our life is more than us. Okay? It sounds like a strange thing because this world says the opposite. It says the exact opposite. So your life is not about you. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about one individual. It's not about you. And actually, believe it or not, this is the good news. Because it's about Jesus. It's about something greater than us. And this is what we're called to. We're called to something greater than us. If it's just about us, then the boy with the most toy wins. And quite frankly, that gets boring after a while. You get this, then you got to take care of it, then what? Right? So it's not just an endless succession of what do you want to do next. It's about your calling to become holy. It's about your calling to reach new heights, to not just do simply human acts, but to do godly acts, to do something supernatural. And so when you do things, when you labor, whether it's at work or at home, you can add grace to this by asking God to add grace to it. So think about this. When you fold the clothes, ask God to bless the people who wear those clothes. If you're working and you're a construction worker, ask God to bless the home and the people who live in the home. If you're feeding somebody, ask God to bless the food and to bless the people eating the food so that they don't just feed them physically, but feed them spiritually as well. So look for that opportunity to bring grace to souls that are in need. And whoever's right there, see, that's that first reading. It's not so far mysterious. God's grace is not so far mysterious. It's right there. All you got to do is do it. Really, it's that simple. Just do it. That's all you got to do. Ask God for those things. And so now, when we look at an alcoholic in everything in their life, they're always looking for an excuse to have a drink, and then they'll have a drink. This is a reason to have a drink. I'm happy, I'm going to have a drink. I'm sad, I'm going to have a drink. Oh, today was okay, I'm going to have a drink. I got a new vehicle, I'm going to have a drink. I got a new computer, I got a drink. I'm going to throw away my computer, I'm going to have a drink. They look for any excuse to have a drink, right? Now, for us as Christians, we should have that attitude towards grace. We should look for anything should be an excuse to bring grace to others. Why? Because we can do it. By virtue of your baptism, you haven't been empowered to bring grace to everybody. And so when you do those little things, even when you shake somebody's hand, ask God to bring grace to them. When you're cooking, when you're doing anything, look for an excuse for grace for them and ask God for grace for them. Whenever they're suffering, they're suffering, you can, okay, stop and pray with them. Be that means of grace. Be that person, that light to them, and live that higher calling that God has given you. To not just do natural acts, but to do supernatural acts. Because when you do that, when you ask God to be with you in the act to bring grace, you're not doing something just natural. You are doing something supernatural. God is adding something. He is adding His grace to your natural acts. And then people receive that grace. So now you become a means of grace. Your labor becomes a means of grace. And even your suffering becomes a means of grace for souls, those who need it. What an awesome thing. You imagine how different the world would be if every Catholic realized that and looked for an opportunity for grace for everybody. Where every time we said hello, we said some sort of grace. A lot of countries do that. Praise be Jesus Christ, now and forever. Boom. You're just always saying everything was an opportunity for grace. So next time you say goodbye to the cash register, tell them, God bless you. I'm praying for you. Be that means of grace for others. And then so that we can be that light. Don't be afraid to be that light. And then change that world. Change the world and make this world a better place.